as a participant, but we do really want to encourage participation and discussion in this meeting. So just to be able to manage the audio, please either use the raise hand function so we can allow you to unmute and speak, or you can also always enter comments into the chat function as well. And if you're calling into the meeting just by phone, not in the application, I believe you can use *9 to raise your hand so that we can unmute you. I think those are the main housekeeping items. I just want to highlight a couple of, let me start with an overview of the agenda. So I'm kicking us off, calling the meeting to order, and we will spend the bulk of this morning's agenda on this workshop on our statewide truck parking study. This has been a big effort for our team at Caltrans. So we've also got our consultants here who will be presenting and leading the workshop. This issue is really important to Caltrans, and I know to all of our partners out there that it's a real safety issue, that we don't have enough parking for trucks on our system. And I believe just about every day in California, a parked truck on the roadside is struck by another vehicle. So making sure we have safe parking for truckers is really a big issue that we want to dig into today. And then we'll also this morning have updates from our key partners at CalSTA, CTC, and FHWA on the agenda, and Marlon as well from Caltrans Division of Transportation Planning. And then tomorrow we're going to spend a lot of our agenda with a presentation from Joel Irvis from the Regional Asthma Management and Prevention Program about freight automation and specifically health and equity impact. So we're going to have a panel discussing that tomorrow. All right, I think those are kind of the key items on the agenda. And I also just wanted to mention in the way of updates, there's quite a bit going on at the state level. We are still watching and waiting to see what happens with the state budget and the transportation portions of that are still being negotiated. So lots of activity happening there. Certainly we anticipate in my program and planning modal programs, quite a bit of work coming out of some of those state budget items. So we'll probably have discussion at a future CFAC on some of those issues. We're also closely watching what's happening in DC with the discussion around the federal reauthorization and also potential federal infrastructure stimulus investment. And in preparation for potential federal funding, if there is a significant infrastructure bill passed and a lot of additional funding coming to the state, we've been having internal conversations about how to really bolster our project pipeline. So you might have seen in the last week or two, I put out something that we're calling a call for innovative concepts. So just really project ideas. They don't have to be fully fledged or fully fleshed out projects ready for environmental or design, but just project ideas that we are encouraging our partners to send us to develop into future projects. So hopefully you saw that. I think Marlon will have, we'll expand on that a little bit more later in the agenda, and we'll have time for questions and discussion if you have them, but certainly freight, goods movement projects, and particularly those that support innovation and clean freight movement are absolutely the types of ideas we hope to get through that call for concepts. So just wanted to highlight that. A lot of potentially exciting opportunities for transportation investment coming to us. So we want to really make sure we're ready for that. And yeah, thinking about how those investments could really support our state goals and modernizing our transportation system. So lots of things to be excited about as we are emerging from the pandemic and the state is reopening. So I think I'll stop there with my opening comments and pass it back to, I believe, to Eric to get into our first agenda item about the state truck parking study. Pass it to you, Eric.
Thanks, Jeannie, and good morning, everyone. Eric Fredericks, the Acting Office Chief for the Office of Sustainable Freight Planning. Apologies about that. And I also want to introduce our team from Cambridge Systematics. And Dan, if you want to bring up the slides, I'll make a few introductory comments and then kick over to you. Good morning, Dan. So just to give a little bit of background, obviously Caltrans has been working on truck parking for decades. We have a lot of safety roadside rest areas. We have only about 10% of the spaces are actually in the public right of way in California for truck parking. And I think about 90% are in the private sector. And we've been tackling some of the issues, but progress has been challenging. And more recently, the California Sustainable Freight Action Plan was adopted in 2016 and identified truck parking as one of the top actions for Caltrans to tackle and take a look at. The Freight Efficiency Group identified the truck parking issues as a top 5 priority, and Freight Efficiency Group was one of the teams that was instrumental in constructing the Sustainable Freight Action Plan. And so out of the Freight Efficiency Group, we actually formed a California Truck Parking Technical Advisory Committee. And we met for a few years and did surveys with partners. And we just determined we didn't have enough information to make solid decisions about where to make investments and what kind of investments, be they infrastructure or technology investments. We also saw what was going on around the country with truck parking studies and in particular global positioning systems data, GPS data, and saw what other states were doing in terms of actually being able to identify the truck parking issues through this kind of new and emerging data. So so that's why we embarked on this ambitious study, and through a competitive process selected Cambridge Systematics, and wanted to introduce Dan Anderson, who is the project manager for this with Cambridge Systematics. And Dan, I'll turn it over to you and let you introduce your team as well. You're on mute, Dan. If you're looking, the mute button I think is at the bottom of the screen. I think you should be able to unmute Allison.
Yeah, sorry, I can't forcibly unmute.
Dan, can you hear me? Okay. Just can't get the mute button. Um, let's see. Well, while Dan is trying to figure out the mute button, I can introduce. I'm not sure. Jim Brogren is online as well, and he's a principal with Cambridge Systematics, part of the team, and Leela Singer Burke as well. Oh, Dan, can we hear you now? Oh, sorry. Um,
This is Leela with Cambridge Systematics. Can you hear me?
yes. Good morning,
Okay.
Leela.
Good morning. While Dan is figuring out his audio, Dan, if I can go ahead and get started while you're figuring out your audio, if that's okay. I know for me it was just connecting, making sure it was connected, but Dan, just pipe up if you are if you're back on, if we can hear you again. So hi everyone, and thanks for giving us some time to work out these issues. But we're really excited to be here today and talk to you about the work we've been doing with Eric on truck parking. And so I'll just introduce a little bit about what we're going to get into. So first, we're going to talk to you about, a little bit more about what Eric was saying about why we're even doing this study. What are the key truck parking challenges in the state? As well as how we're actually going to mitigate those challenges, the strategies that we're considering. And both Eric and Jeannie did a good job sort of setting up some of the problems in California and why truck parking is such an important need. So we're excited to tell you a little bit more about exactly what that need is. And then finally, we're actually going to tell you a little bit about how we've estimated the number of spaces needed for shippers and receivers, as well as our next steps moving into the next stages of the project. So if we go to the next slide, I'll go ahead and get started, Dan. Great. So starting on the study purpose. So the purpose of the truck parking study at the highest level is to understand where there is that unmet demand for truck parking. So where are our truckers trying to park, but there isn't the space available, or they're parking in unsafe locations? We also are trying to identify the truck parking challenges and make recommendations that help mitigate those challenges. So we're doing that through several different ways. We're looking at the size and layout of truck parking facilities, as well as amenities. We're also considering, which is a really important topic in the state at the moment, but zero emission fueling at truck parking lots. So we're looking at the feasibility of that. That's one element of the study as well. And another element is that we're developing public-private partnership action plans for identifying and funding facilities. So looking at some of those potential partnerships, since truck parking is both, it really involves the commercial and private sector, as well as the public sector, such as the safety roadside rest areas that Eric was mentioning. So finally, our study is also going to research potential strategies and funding and prepare an implementation plan for the state as well. So in terms of how we're going about all of this ambitious goal.
Leela?
Yeah.
Am I on audio now?
We can hear you now, Dan. All right.
You're doing awesome. There's only 2 slides left here. And then you're going to take over again. I should let you continue, but.
Well, I'll let you introduce yourself a bit. Yeah,
okay.
Go ahead.
So I'll just cover these 2 slides real quick, and then I want to turn it back over to Leela anyway. So thanks, and I apologize for the mishap. Yeah, so the first kind of the broad picture overview, Eric mentioned the importance of using GPS data. So our first step in the process was to identify and quantify all of the existing designated truck parking facilities across the state and count the number of spaces that each one has. And then we geofenced each of them, drew a boundary around each of them in GIS, and then overlaid onto that GIS map, we overlaid the GPS data. And so we collected data from 4 different 2-week time periods in 2019. And this particular image on here is an illustration of how we see it, where each of those dots would represent a truck that was parked at a particular rest area at some point during that period when we were collecting data. And then from that, then we were able to do all kinds of analysis. And in addition to demarcating or geofencing the designated truck parking facilities, such as truck stops and rest areas, we also created a geofence or a buffer around major highway right-of-way, so that we could also see where trucks were parked along the shoulders or on freeway ramps, etc. So that we could do a quick analysis of the undesignated, what we're calling undesignated parking that occurs outside of a designated facility.
Dan, sorry to interrupt, but I just noticed you're in the not in the full screen mode. You're kind of in that other mode in PowerPoint. So I don't know if you can make it full screen or not. I just was thinking it might be hard to see, and also I couldn't message you probably because you have your screen full.
Yeah. Let me share it again. See if I can pull up presentation mode. There. Let's try that one. How's that? Is that better?
Perfect. Thank you.
All right. Hey, thanks for catching that, Eric. I can't see what you all are seeing. All right. So with that, then I'm going to turn it back over to Leela to talk about some of the things that we've learned.
Okay, thank you, Dan. Okay, so in terms of the truck parking challenges, what we understand so far in California, so we know that there are approximately 15,000 designated truck parking spaces in the state. That means the total number of spaces, if we add up all the truck parking lots and the spaces in them, that's how many there are. Where are those located? It's almost 50-50 in urban versus rural areas by census urban areas, but a little bit more in rural areas. And then in terms of the ownership, like Eric was mentioning, only about 8% of those spaces are publicly owned, meaning they're spaces that are at the safety roadside rest areas. The rest are commercially owned, privately owned. But the largest percentage of those spaces are actually owned by the national truck stop chains, really the large ones like TA or things like that. So many of them are at these pretty high quality facilities. And then in terms of the utilization of spaces, this is getting to, again, how much parking do we have for the need? We have 107% approximately utilization at those public SRRAs. So that means that they're very well used, and same with the national truck stop parking lots as well, parking facilities. And then there's other truck parking facilities, many of which are lower quality, maybe don't have amenities, are not desirable places to park, and those are used less in the state. So the map on the left shows you just the high level view of here are all the truck parking facilities in the state, and red of course means that they're more at or over capacity, and then the green is they have some availability still, with the orange yellow color being in the middle. So, and if we go to the next slide, you'll see that we also looked at the undesignated parking. So this is the parking that's not actually at that truck parking lot. Again, it's in the right of way, as Dan was mentioning. So you can see the high level view of where that's occurring in the state with a simple heat map. And again, this is just our right of ways of interest for the study. But you see a high concentration in the LA County into the Inland Empire area, which is notable as well. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a second. And In terms of the duration, we also are able to tell how long these trucks are stopping for. So the majority of these stops are actually either short break or staging stops. So they're not staying for too long. The majority of these stops are less than 4 hours. So when we look at these statistics at the district level, we're able to tell a little bit more about, again, getting to where that need is. And you can see, as I was mentioning earlier, in the LA County and Inland Empire area, we're seeing the highest concentration of undesignated park trucks. But we also see a lot up along the 5 and through into the San Francisco, Sacramento area, and Fresno and Bakersfield as well. So here's the summary by district, and what you're able to see in terms of the table is the 24-hour demand. So how many trucks are parking on average in a 24-hour period? And then the total peak hour demand is the last column. So that's at the peak hour, which we identified as being between midnight and 1 a.m. in the state. So again, these are the statewide statistics by district for that truck parking within the right of way. So what we can do is we can look at these two things together, both the designated parking as well as the undesignated, that parking in the right of way, to understand what's going on a whole statewide scale, and specifically looking at it at the peak hour. So what we know is that at the designated truck parking lots, there's a deficit of nearly 1,500 spaces. Well, in terms of undesignated parking, there's that's happening at about 6,000 trucks parking between in that peak hour period. So what we can get is a total parking deficit of over 7,000, which notably is about half the number of total spaces provided in the state of California currently, of that 15,000 number that I mentioned earlier. So looking at this in a little bit more detail, we also can look at it by district, which is important, again, for Caltrans to understand some of that variation by region. And so you can see that certain districts, similar ones that I've mentioned before, rise to the top in terms of their total parking deficit at the peak hour. Notably, so we've identified the number of facilities in each district that are over capacity, such as in the Inland Empire, there are almost 30 facilities with a deficit, for example. And then you can see the number of spaces that are a deficit, so almost 702 spaces, and then the undesignated demand, and again, a total parking deficit. So we're starting to understand where are those spaces really needed for the truckers to be able to have a safe and reasonable place to park. So we also have really great data from our stakeholders. One of those things that you see in the map on the left is the CHP data, where they were able to give us some information about the number of commercial vehicle parking citations that are occurring. So these geographies may be a little unfamiliar because they're CHP geographies, but what you can again see, it's similar in terms of like the darkest red colors of where more citations are occurring, and again, that there's lots of caveats. So there's really a lot of citations again in the Inland Empire, Fresno, Bakersfield, and some of those urban areas that are standing out a little bit more. Reading standing out as well. And then we can also understand from our stakeholders a little bit about where they're seeing undesignated truck parking. So what we did was make an online map available, which you're seeing on the right hand of this slide. And what you see is where our stakeholders told us that undesignated truck parking is happening, where they're seeing a lot of trucks lining up in the right of way. And again, you see some of those similar Caltrans districts showing up, as well as a little bit more along the Central Coast, for example, and in the San Diego region as well. So with this input, we also have one other key source that we looked at in terms of our truck parking need, and that's related to the safety, specifically where are collisions occurring. So this was mentioned earlier, but almost every day in California, a parked truck is struck by another vehicle on average. That's what we found in our data from 2014 to 2018. And in the map, you can see where those are occurring, both the fatalities and collisions that did not involve a fatality. But in terms of fatalities, unfortunately, about on average, 2 of those collisions per month actually result in a fatality. So these are collisions that are with parked trucks, just to be super clear about that. So that's when a parked truck is involved in a collision. So we also looked at the data over year to understand the trend. Unfortunately, this is from our data. We understand that it's becoming, there are more and more collisions every year. But between 2014 and 2018, there is a difference of 250 collisions involving parked trucks, now up to 350 collisions involving parked trucks in 2018, the most recent year that data was available. The fatalities have been on the rise as well. So with these 3 key data inputs, we were able to do a high-level prioritization of our corridors. So we took these 3 pieces of information. The first is that collision data we were just talking about. The second is the stakeholder factor, the stakeholder data that we talked about previously as well. And then the third is the demand factor. So all of that information I presented up front about where the truck parking demand is in the state. And what we did is we tied that to our corridors of interest to get, again, a prioritized idea of where the highest need is in the state by segment. We use segments lengths between 1 mile and 10 miles long and try to break it at natural points. And what you're seeing is high, medium, low segments. So in terms of high, medium, low need. So in total, on the next slide, we'll see that what we did is we combined it in a way that makes most sense. And if we can go to the next slide, oops. Yes, so what we did was we weighted each of these 3 factors differently. So to us, we're trying to identify the highest truck parking need. We weighted that at 60% because that's really the core of what we're trying to get to. But we don't want to ignore what stakeholders had to say and the safety based on our crash data. So we weighted the collision data at 30%, the stakeholder at 10%, and in total came up with a combined prioritized score, high, medium, and low across the state, which is what you're seeing in the map. And you can see different segments are popping up in each district. Every district has some need, which is really important to know. And then in some districts, the need is there are more high need segments, and in some districts, such as in LA County, Inland Empire, around Sacramento, some in San Diego near the border. But every district, every time that you're seeing blue, yellow, or the red color, it means there is a need, and that segment was important. So that is what we have in terms of our truck parking challenges and needs that we've identified so far. So Dan and I are happy to take any questions or comments at this point that you all have.
So our next section, then we'll look at some strategies, and we'll want your input on what you feel will work or not work. But again, before we move on, we want to make sure that we understand the needs and the issues. And so Leila did a great job of summarizing that. Just want to make sure if anybody has any questions or comments. And I'm kind of running blind because I'm sharing my screen. So if somebody is entering something in the chat, I don't know, Allison or somebody, can you read those off for us?
Yeah, absolutely. I will let you know
Or
if
somebody
anything comes up
raises
in the chat.
hand. Yeah. It looks like maybe I think I found a way to look at the chat box. So there's a question. Can you clarify if the crash data involving parked trucks occurred along state highway right-of-way, local streets, or both? Leila, do you want to take a stab at that one?
So in general, we actually looked at the data for the whole state, and so it's happening across the state. But in terms of what you're seeing on the map, that was just our corridors of interest, which is primarily like, the freeways, interstates, and the state highways. But yeah, it is notably like there were collisions on other roadways as well. But I don't have a great sense of like the percent on different types of roadways at the moment. But yeah, so what you're seeing in the map was on our corridors of interest.
Alrighty. Let's see.
And there's another
have a-
question.
Oh,
Sorry.
okay.
No, you go ahead.
Thank you for addressing this important issue that's been long overdue. During the pandemic, the truck drivers had a desert of access to basic necessities like food and restrooms due to the shutdowns. Excellent point. They did. Several of the rest areas and truck stops were, shutting down, and then that even presented a greater issue.
We also have a question in the Q&A section from Fran Inman. She says, Dan, can you confirm that this data from 2019 included in the current EDL requirements and HOS requirements?
It's a good question, Fran. The hours of service requirements changed. I'm trying to blank now. Didn't they change in fall of 20? Was it? I know it was
I think it was
November.
2017.
Was it 2017? Okay, it was late in the year, but then they were enforced. So I think late in 2019, wasn't it? Where the ELD enforcement began. So hours of service, yeah. So it may. I thought the strict enforcement of ELDs happened in the end of 2019, November timeframe of 2019. But even so, I mean, drivers have always been required to log their hours of service and have limitations on how much how far, how much time they can spend driving and behind and at work. And so when their hours of service are about up, then they need a place to park. With the ELDs, which stands for electronic logging devices, that removed any fudge factor that a driver may have had by hand annotating their time. And so it made enforcement even stricter, and it like I mentioned, it eliminated that fudge time. So a driver, once their hours of service were up, then they just had to pull over immediately. And so I think, to Fran's point, there may be even more undesignated parking occurring now than maybe what we fully captured in 2019. Any other chat questions or Q&A, or should we move on?
We have one more chat question. Oh, two more. No, one more chat question. This is from Rena Tang. She says, oh, we just got another one. Can you go over again the difference between statistics shown for the truck parking within row 24-hour demand versus the total truck parking deficit undesignated demand? Thank you.
Yeah, we find that slide. So this is the high level slide. It shows that, but so what we want to do is let's say there's a truck stop. There are two truck stops 50 miles apart, and one of them has capacity and the other one doesn't. One of them is maxed out and the other one has a little bit of availability. if we average the two to say, then that sometimes can give misinformation. A driver may not be able to go that 50 miles to the next one where there is availability. And so in this particular exercise, we wanted to look at just those truck stops and rest areas that were over capacity. And if it's over capacity, then we say it has a deficit. And through the data, we can see, and by over capacity, we can see trucks are parked like around the rest area or the truck stop on the side streets. And so we count up the number of trucks that are parked surrounding a facility and not in the designated spaces. And so we did that across the state, and that's where we came up with during that peak hour when everybody's, most trucks are trying to park at the same time. There's about 1,500 spaces across all truck stops. At that same time, there are about 5,800 trucks parked along the right of way for a total deficit of 7,300. So Marina, is that what you're asking about? Did that answer your question? This is the detailed slide.
Yeah, she responded that helped. So, I do see one other question, Dan, as well. It says, will the JS data for the needs analysis be available for download as GIS files?
Do you want to, Leila, we prepared something for Caltrans. Do you want to, is that what I don't know, do you want to take that one on?
Yeah, so so we're providing Caltrans with some of the data. It's the high level data that we're able to share. Some things about the specifics of the truck parking facilities is information that can't be publicly shared, but we're working with Caltrans to make the data available in an online map format. Whether it will be available for download, I'm not sure, but it will at least at a minimum be available for viewing is our understanding at that point. So we're working with Caltrans to make that possible.
Alrighty. So let's keep moving on. Whoops, too far. Let's look at what we can do about it. So the first thing that comes to most people's mind is, well, from a public perspective, what could Caltrans do about it? Well, one option is to expand rest areas that are at or over capacity. So we just did a crude look. We have not assessed any individual trucks or rest area to see if it actually could be expanded. This is just a high level exercise to say, if we've identified that there are 44 rest areas across the state that are at or over capacity. So if we were to double double the number of truck parking spaces at those 44 facilities, then we could add about 600 new spaces statewide. Keep in mind that our peak hour deficit is about 7,000 spaces. So, that would fulfill about 8% of the statewide parking deficit. Crude estimates of cost, somewhere around $15 to $45 million. Another option that comes up is just building a dedicated truck parking facility somewhere along the highway right of way. Again, this is typically more expensive because we're starting from scratch. I guess it depends. The particular example that's shown on the slide is actually in Missouri. They converted a closed rest area and made it all truck parking. So in that case, the cost is a little bit lower because the ramps are already in existence. So if we were to do that, and let's say we were able to build 10 designated truck parking facilities, each that had about 50 spaces, we could maybe accommodate 7% of that statewide deficit at a cost of somewhere around $50 million. Other options then kind of outside the highway right of way, and this for the most part would probably be in the purview of a city or a county. that whoever owns the curb space, but in those industrial areas, and that maybe have some curb space where it's okay for trucks to park. In a lot of cases, we don't want trucks parking on curb space, maybe near a residential area or school, but if it's an industrial area, maybe the city or the county decides that it's okay, it's safe for trucks to park there. But you want to be able to manage that and control it. Maybe you don't want them parking there overnight. Maybe you just want them parking there during certain hours. And so there are apps now available that can help control that use, where a driver would check in when they pull up to the curb. It sets the clock. It gives them information about how long they can park there. It allows enforcement driving by to know whether a truck has exceeded the time limit for parking along that curb. And it can really help, you can kind of provide that temporary staging need around shippers and receivers while trucks are waiting for their appointment at their customer. So that's a promising option. It's a newer kind of up and coming technology option that we can use to, again, utilize existing space. So pretty low cost option. Another no cost option for the public is to allow property owners that have excess space. These would be properties that are already zoned for commercial truck use and access. So, so a facility like that maybe has excess space could allow trucks to park on their space and then charge a modest fee for that service. And in the process, then the private property owner is able to monetize that space, and then it provides parking for trucks. Right now, the primary use of this is more in storage, long-term storage. It's mostly used kind of on a monthly lease base where a trucking company could park, have access to 10 or 50 or 100 spaces for either trailer storage or truck parking. It is growing as just a short-term overnight parking need. The little map, this is just a screen capture I took. Secure Space is one of the leaders in this field, and this was a screen capture from my app, and it shows a number of spaces around the ports of LA Long Beach where parking is available. Again, the bulk of those, when you look at them, are kind of those monthly leases, but still that's huge, and it fulfills a big need for parking. If you can get those locals that need parking to utilize those spaces, then they're not filling up the truck stops and rest areas. As I mentioned just a minute ago, shippers and receivers generate the greatest, they're the generators of truck parking demand. I mean, trucks are coming to their facility to make a pickup or a delivery, and typically they'll have to wait before they get access, either because they arrived the night before and then they need a place to park overnight until they can make their pickup or delivery in the morning, or if they have an appointment, quite often they'll get there early, or maybe the shipper receiver isn't ready for them, and so they need a place to stage. And so by a shipper and receiver actually accommodating them, providing a space for them to park, it can alleviate, that can provide a big need. The challenge is convincing shippers and receivers to do that. So there's, we can use outreach, incentives, or even zoning requirements on new facilities, requiring them to provide this space. Those are some broad categories. The next set, I'm going to turn it over to Jody from WSP to talk about some public-private partnerships that we're considering, but just want to have a quick check. Any questions or comments before we move on to a few other approaches or strategies?
We did have one question in the chat. This is from Eva Slover. It says, were there any further details about collisions with parked trucks, such as their average distance from flowing traffic? What about the average distance between truck stops? Have there been any indicators for ideal distances between urban and rural for safe truck stop locations?
I'll take on the last one, and then Lita can answer the other ones specific to crash data. The ideal distance is hard to judge. So there hasn't really been an ideal distance. Because of the strict requirements for hours of service, and truckers not being able to exceed the hours of service that they have or allotment that they have, providing truck parking facilities more frequently allows them to maximize their time and therefore their revenues. I mean, whenever they're parked, they're not earning money. They've got to be traveling. And so they want to maximize that. So, you know, if you asked a trucker, the ideal would be every 5 miles, there'd be a place where they could pull over and park, but that's not going to be feasible. So anyways, that one's a hard one to, as close as we can get in, you know, every 15 to 30 minutes, maybe. But yeah, Leila, some of the crash information, do you want to answer that?
Dan, tell me again, I'm not seeing this question in terms of the question was about where those collisions were occurring.
Yeah, how close to the right of way, distance between designated truck parking facilities.
Yeah, I don't think we looked at that information like at that level of detail. And it's in the data, I'm not sure that the data supports a great analysis of that either, but yeah, so I don't think we looked at that level of detail for the collision analysis.
Allison, are there other Q&A or chat?
Yeah, there's a couple more. This one says, is there any information on whether truck trips and parking need has increased during the pandemic and shift by many consumers to even more home business delivery?
So we don't have data on it. We collected data from 2019 specifically because we felt like 2020 was an anomaly year. We do know that truck traffic has increased dramatically. There are a lot more trucks on the road, and therefore logic would tell us that the demand for parking has increased. So if anything, those numbers surely have gone up since the pandemic. Was there another question, Allison?
Yeah, this one is from Samuel Shelton. It says, how well does the undesignated parking heat map line up with collision data?
No, we looked at that. Leila, I don't.
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't know that we looked at that specifically. What we did do is in the needs analysis, we were able to overlap the collision data with that need, right? So we took we used both of those data inputs. But yeah, that's a good question. I don't think we've looked yet at where the undesignated, but we would assume that where the undesignated truck parking, of course, is occurring is where more collisions would be occurring as well.
Other comments or questions?
One last one. This is from Fran Inman. She says, I agree that we should study the accident data in terms of prioritizing our solutions to see if we can eliminate as many accidents as possible, or a policy amendment for hours of service to allow truckers to reach the next safe parking area by using a grace period. Oh, maybe this is more of a comment. It has a question mark, but.
Yeah. No, that's a great comment. It's a, yeah. Okay. Why don't we move along? I'm going to turn some time over to Jody Misiak from WSP. Jody, are you on?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes.
Excellent. Sound is working. Thanks, Dan. As part of this initiative, we've been taking a look at ways in which a wide range of potential partnerships, including public-private partnerships, but other types of partnerships, public-public partnerships, other types of arrangements that may be less formally arranged than a formal sort of P3 could be helpful for providing the infrastructure and facilities that is critical. Fundamental to that is screening those potential opportunities against a range of factors that would help to determine the potential feasibility and the readiness and the potential for effective implementation. So we kind of take our cue from other types of screening tools, and in this particular tool, really looking at the full range of factors that one would consider when deciding to pursue a potential partnership. And these include the ways in which the partnership may or may not align with policy goals. That's extremely critical. Partnership may sound really interesting, but if it's not aligning with policy goals, then that's certainly a potential challenge to the success of the project. Organizational capacity for implementing the potential partnership, not just in the near term, but potential long term, if there are potential arrangements for long-term financing, operations, and maintenance. Have to ensure that there is public sector capacity for those types of partnerships. The potential, and this is critical in many cases, the legal constraints and authority related to a potential partnership are the laws and regulations in place to ensure that what you're thinking about doing is appropriate and allowed, and if not, what steps would need to be taken. So that would be the type of thing in a screening tool that would be critical in some ways, may make it much more challenging to implement a potential partnership. And of course, something that comes up again and again, regardless of whether or not it's a partnership, but is even more critical when you're bringing additional parties to the table, is public support and the ways in which that could affect the path forward for potential strategy that involves partnering with multiple entities. The next slide has a few more. And then so sort of a big critical element when we are using the screening tool for thinking through potential partnerships is the way in which risks and responsibilities are allocated between partners. Who owns the risk of potential legal issues or logistical issues, and how that is documented is often at the core of a successful partnership. And so those types of considerations are important when we're thinking through the examples for partnerships. And then of course the big one is affordability. Who's bringing money to the table? Is money coming to the table from other sources? And can this partnership be either supported by existing sources of funding and financing, or if new ones can be identified potentially as a result of the partnership, are all really critical considerations, again, when we are using this framework to screen partnerships, not just now, but in the future. It really doesn't change the framework. The different the elements and the different considerations may change, but ultimately these types of considerations are critical when thinking about all types of potential partnership strategies. The next slide. So that's very sort of high level view of the of how our partnership screening strategy is structured. But how would you really apply that? What types of examples could that be applied to is really something that we're also digging into. And one good example is a potential, let's imagine a partnership where there's a publicly owned parcel adjacent to a major freight hub. And there's a potential example right there. There's probably a wide range of examples where this may exist and where there's the alignment of need and resources. And something like that could be an example of a potential partnership that would be screened through a tool like this, would be the development of the site under a long-term revenue sharing agreement between the public and private partners, and to look at it through the different lenses that I just mentioned, to ensure that the approach is appropriate is really a critical step when we're thinking about the partnerships. So that's one potential example, and we are going to be screening that one using the tool. The next one. Another potential example, which gets screened out very quickly, but is very informative, given all of the different benefits that one might have, is a publicly owned parcel with interstate right-of-way where there would be some sort of revenue generation and revenue sharing. It sounds wonderful. Unfortunately, there and when we would screen it and look at it, it's promising in so many different areas, but there is one fatal flaw, that it is not allowed currently under current law. So that's the type of thing that, while you identify that fatal flaw, all of the other things that get identified, including the wonderful benefits, can help maybe make the argument as one might go forward, indicating that might be a constraining law or a regulation that does not allow something currently, but maybe in the future. So another good example in the next slide of screening or using the screening tool would be taking a look at new technologies, such as those for zero emission vehicles. And we have been taking a look at this, we've been thinking about it, and whether or not this might actually represent a relaxation of the constraint that we discussed on the previous slide, because there could be interest in allowing charging and revenue generation from EV truck charging infrastructure. Right now, that is not permitted, so that in a screening process would still be a challenge and a fatal flaw. But it is somewhere where we would be, we could investigate along the edges of these examples of whether or not these could be examples that would be maybe pilots, or maybe things that at some point in time, the federal government may seek to support. So that's something that is a variation on an example that could be screened, but then also identifies potential places where change in constraints could really enable very, very important infrastructure. So two really great examples of that we could potentially look at. And then the next slide includes examples of support that are, that partnerships that may not necessarily be sort of formally defined as partnerships, but they have the characteristics of partnerships and would be screened as partnerships. One example, one variation would be having existing commercial truck stop where there's already an existing public parcel that could be, where there could be the construction of additional parking, and there might be a contractual arrangement that needs to be developed and screened for that. Slightly different, but very similar example would be one where there's an existing truck stop, and then there's public funds could be potentially used to invest in a private parcel for expansion of truck parking, and the considerations are slightly different, but in a lot of ways, the screening tool for both of them would help to flag those potential challenges and considerations that would make either one of these a potential success. So those are variations that could be assessed, screened, and applied in real life. For particular locations. And then the next one is really sort of a variation on the partnership. And as I mentioned, maybe the public-public partnerships or cooperative agreements where you have potential examples where there's underutilized parking facilities, and we know, a wide range of potential examples out there that they could potentially, through a partnership, would be leveraged and used more efficiently for parking, and really, you know, enhance the resources that already exist and the application of those resources. And again, the similar tool, the tool we just saw before and the one we would use for screening of these partnerships, would look at the similar things. You know, does it align with policy? Does it align with sort of legal frameworks? Does it have public support? All of the same things really need to be considered, again, regardless of whether or not it's a public-private partnership, a public-public partnership, or maybe some even more complicated arrangement with multiple parties engaged. So here's an example, you know, but there are many others probably where we're thinking about existing resources in a more innovative way through partnerships. So I believe that's the end of the examples. And again, we will be taking a look at these through the lens of the screening tool, so folks can have, you know, maybe a more nuanced view of what each of these would mean if they were to be actually implemented in certain circumstances. So if I guess maybe pause, Dan, for questions or any comments on this topic.
Yeah. So any comments or questions, any of these that you think are particularly promising and or challenging? Allison, do you want, I think there's a few notes in the chat box, but again, I'm kind of running blind.
Yeah, so we have one that says, any considerations for revisiting the existing publicly owned spaces? Can we add any additional spaces by restriping? We may not have designed each one for maximum capacity. Perhaps some spaces aren't being used for one reason or another.
Yeah, that is a good thought. In talking with truck drivers on other studies, one suggestion that somebody said was that, you know, when you have pull-through spaces, which I think all of our rest areas do have, it's really easy for truck drivers to get in and out of them. And so one recommendation from a driver was to narrow the spaces, since it's so easy for them to get in and out. They don't need as wide a space, and then you can squeeze more spaces in. That would require changing design standards. My gut feel is that I think we're utilizing rest area space pretty well, but there could be some investigation to that. I think the other aspect that we've not looked at is, and we don't have the data in this study, but it could be done on an individual basis, would be to look at, are the car spaces being utilized? And so if there's a particular rest area that's really popular with trucks, not so popular with cars, maybe we could reconfigure it to remove some of the car parking spaces and convert them to truck. So that's certainly not something that should be considered. Thanks. What's the next one?
Somebody else in the chat wants to know how much of the parking is publicly versus privately owned.
There's a slide on that. It'll take me forever to get there, but Leela.
Yep. So in terms of the spaces, it's 8% of the California spaces that are publicly owned, and the remaining are commercially or privately owned spaces.
Is there another comment or question, Allison?
Looks like that's all we have for now.
I've seen a couple of, I don't know what's happening with my screen, but I see like a comment or a question will pop up and then it fades away. Seems like I've seen a couple from Fran, but then they fade away too fast. No?
It looks like there's another comment from Fran, at least that I can see, that says the House infrastructure bill includes the truck parking issue. It includes $1 billion grant. Seems that this study will help us present our California case for multiple grants.
Yeah, great point. Thanks. Yep. Hasn't passed yet, but we're all crossing our fingers that the final version will have funding for truck parking. And when it does, yeah, this plan will really help set the stage for how best to implement and utilize that funding. All right. let me just touch on a couple others real quick. I think we're actually doing okay on time. We're nearing the end. So I just wanted to touch on some policies and programs and other technologies that could be considered. So a truck parking availability system, also sometimes known as a truck parking information management system. That's where, just like at an airport parking lot where, you know, it'll tell you how many spaces are available at each level of the parking garage. Similar technology. It's been around forever. There's different ways to put sensors at a truck parking facility, and then notify drivers either through apps or through roadside signs of how many spaces are available in real time. And so that if the driver does have some flexibility in their hours of service, maybe they know they've got an hour left, and there's a roadside sign that would indicate, you know, at the next exit, there's no, or maybe the next exit, there are some available spaces, but the one after that is all filled up. Well, then maybe the driver would make the decision then to pull off a little bit earlier than he or she desired, but knowing that there's some availability at that closer exit, they can pull off and park there. So what this does, it helps to redistribute the spaces that are available and kind of help to balance that demand. There's still a huge demand for more spaces, but this is a help. It helps us to utilize better utilize the underutilized spaces. And California is in a partnership now with Arizona, New Mexico, and Texas, developing a system, wiring up rest areas all along I-10 for that purpose. Other supportive policies and programs, integrate truck parking into roadway project development process. So if a capacity improvement is being considered, then also look at, is there a demand for parking, and could you economically, as part of a road construction or capacity project, add some additional parking, just, you know, right within the right of way, adjacent to the highway. Another one, consider truck parking needs prior to purchase or sale of any right of way. So, you know, don't give up any right of way if there's a demand for parking. Maybe we can use that for a parking facility. Reassess public facility closures in high demand areas. You know, maybe there's not a demand for a rest area, but it could serve as a great dedicated truck parking facility. Allow parking under freeways. Actually, I think in the Oakland area and maybe other districts are already doing that and providing some truck parking under that freeway space. Enforcement is always an option. Officers tend to be fairly lenient because they are empathetic to drivers. But you know, if there is an area where there actually is available truck parking spaces, then and drivers aren't using them, then enforcement could be motivation to get trucks off of the road and into spaces where it's safe for them and the traveling public. And then finally, an awareness campaign, a public awareness campaign to emphasize the importance of truck parking. There's the two complaints that we hear from the truck stop industry is that the two biggest hindrances to building more truck stops are public opposition, and then the other is local zoning requirements that, especially offsite improvements, that can drive the cost up of a facility, providing additional access or other offsite improvements that make it challenging. But anyways, that, you know, educating the public on the importance of truck parking and the benefit of it, providing a truck stop gets the trucks off of the streets and into a designated area. I think, yeah. So those were a number of the strategies that we're considering: technology, public policy, programs, partnerships, infrastructure. So again, just one to open up real quick for last round of discussion. Any comments or questions? Any of these strategies that you feel are most promising that you would certainly like us to pursue and develop further, or any that you feel are fatally flawed and should be killed? Allison, any Q&A or chat comments, questions?
Not yet, but people might still be typing.
Okay. While you're pondering over this, one of the things that we've come to realize is there is not a silver bullet, that it is going to take a combination of strategies. There's not one strategy that's just going to solve the truck parking issue. It's going to take a combination of these to make a dent and ultimately make a difference. So we'll move on. We can circle back if anybody does provide some more comments. There's just one, I think this is the last section, just a couple of slides. And this is related to the strategy of encouraging shippers and receivers to provide truck parking on site. And so the challenge there is to be able to estimate how many spaces would actually be needed. And so using the data that we collected for this study, we did a case study in San Diego County and looked at all of what we call service stops, so those stops at shippers and receivers. And through the data, we could see if a truck that made a service stop, if they needed to park somewhere before that service stop. And through an analysis of the data, we could see that approximately 10% of all trucks that entered a shipper receiver did indeed park somewhere, whether it was in the right of way or a vacant lot or in a truck stop. They parked somewhere before they got to their service stop. And so that was helpful. But then the next question we had to answer was, well, how many of those 10% all tried to park at the same time? And so we did an analysis that looked at that, crunched the numbers, and for different types of land uses, different types of facilities rather. So if it was a manufacturing facility, the distribution of parking throughout the day was fairly level. And so the most that we ever saw drivers needing all to park at the same time was at 12%. Warehousing facilities, it was 22%, and at trucking companies and logistics facilities, 42%. And so breaking that down into examples, and how we could utilize this. So if a new facility is being developed, typically the traffic impact analysis is needed. And as part of that, the number of daily truck trips to the facility should be estimated. From that estimate, we would assume that 10% of those weekday truck trips would need parking, and then a certain percent of those would need it all at the same time, depending on what type of facility it is. So looking at two specific made up, but specific examples, let's say you have a widget factory that estimates they're going to generate 150 truck trips every day. So we would estimate from our data that 15 of those trips that come to that factory are going to need to park, and 12% of that 15 will need it all at the same time. So that particular facility, we would recommend they provide 2 truck parking spaces. a large distribution facility that maybe generates 1,000 truck trips a day. So 100 of those would need parking, and 22% or 22 of those would need parking all at the same time. And therefore, we would recommend that that facility provide 22 parking spaces. Quick note, that this is an average, and there are times where that big distribution facility may only need 2 or 3 spaces, and other times they may need 50 plus. So this is more of an average, and so to that end, as much as possible, if larger industrial centers that have a number of shippers and receivers, if a truck parking facility could be established, a common lot to serve all of the shippers and receivers in that area, utilizing these estimates per facility to properly size that truck parking facility or a lot, then that common lot could kind of help manage the ebb and flow of demand at any individual site or facility. So those are just some things to think about and some tools that we've been able to develop to help estimate the need. So with that, I think that that wraps up our kind of where we're at right now, where we're going. But we're in the process now of documenting this. We've finished a flurry of analysis, so we're documenting the supply and demand in a memo. We're documenting our strategies. We're developing a feasibility guide that has recommendations for site selection and layout guidance for designated or dedicated truck parking facilities. Is based on a case study we did in San Diego. As Jody mentioned, we're developing a P3 action plan, and then documenting what I just shared with you that means for estimating the demand that a shipper receiver provides or generates. So we're documenting all of those items. The next step now is to actually develop an implementation plan. Look at which of these strategies are the most feasible, and how and who and when they should be implemented, what type of funding is available for implementation, and then finally wrap all of that up into a draft study report. So that concludes our presentation. If there are any other comments or questions or ideas or recommendations for us, we'd love to hear from you.
Dan and team, this is Jeannie Wardwell. I just want to chime in and appreciate all the work done. This is really impressive to see the results of the study and the strategies and recommendations. I was just thinking to your, question about which strategies is the group most interested in and maybe support further work on. That might be a good question to send out in like a poll or a survey following the meeting, just to really get a pulse on the group, rather than just have individuals chime in on that question. It might actually be helpful to do a survey. So I know we weren't prepared to do that in the flow of this meeting, but maybe as a follow-up,
Sure,
would be useful.
yeah,
Thank you.
we can do that. Thanks, good idea. Allison, I'll let you or somebody else decide when we're done, if there are no more comments.
Thank you. I think we'll go ahead and wrap up this item. I know Antonio Johnson from FHWA has to leave a little early, so but maybe before we take our break, we can have him share his updates. Okay, Antonio, you should be able to unmute yourself now.
Antonio, you may have to hit the connect your audio button and then it will let you unmute.
All right, can you all hear me now?
Yep.
All right, I'll be quick. Few updates since the last time we met. Well, first, for those who have met me before, it's good to hear your voices again. For those who have not, I'm Antonio Johnson, the Planning and Air Quality Team Leader for the California Division of Federal Highway. Some few updates since last meeting. Tasha Clemens, who was my Director of Planning and Environment, has transitioned to our Office of Infrastructure in DC. And so in her absence, myself, along with others on my team, will be picking up some of the slack. Hopefully this doesn't come as a surprise to you all. Prior to Tasha leaving, I was the technical freight person on our team anyway. But again, in her absence, I will be representing Federal Highway, but I will also have down in Southern Cal, my Associate Division Administrator, Monica Gordine, assisting on things in Southern Cal, and my community planner down in Southern Cal, Michael Morris, assisting as well. Again, no big updates other than that. Are there any questions? All right, and sorry to have to break off. I have another meeting I have to attend in 3 minutes. So, Jeannie, if you need anything from me, just let me know.
Thank you so much, Antonio, and we understand there's lots of competing priorities going on. Thank you for joining us.
No problem.
All right, and with that, Eric, Allison, are we gonna go to a quick break here, just a 5-minute break?
Yes.
All right. Given that it's 10:27, maybe we'll give folks a couple of extra minutes and return at 10:35.
Yep, sounds good.
We'll have the rest of our updates. Okay, thank you all. Talk to you in a few minutes. All right, it's 10:35, so let's jump back into our agenda. Hopefully folks are coming back from a quick break. And we just have a few additional updates from partners left on our agenda. So next up, we will turn it over to CTC. Do we have Hannah or Matthew with us to give an update?
Yeah, I'm here. This is Hannah.
Hi, Hannah, go ahead.
Okay, so there were three things I wanted to mention. The first is that I've been working with Matthew and Caltrans staff on on some instructions for some performance metrics for our SB1 programs, and they should be released with the Cycle 3 guidelines as part of our workshop process in the fall. They're just meant to be a help to applicants. They're not supposed to be overly prescriptive, but they'll just provide additional guidance for the Trade Corridor Enhancement Program and the Solutions for Congested Corridors Program and the Local Partnership Competitive Program. And there's a couple metrics applicable to ATP, but I wanted to mention it because some of the trade corridor metrics are a little bit similar to the metrics that I heard the last time that I participated in the Freight Competitive work group call with GOBIS, but they're not exactly the same, especially since the metrics for the trade corridor program are project specific. But I'll be interested to just keep learning about the metrics that work group is working on, just to make sure that I stay in the loop and make them as aligned as possible, the SB1 metrics. So we're working on those. The other thing is I'm working with Chris Shimoda from Caltrucks to give a presentation to the commission in August on the impact of the transition to zero emissions on trucking companies. And so that should be a really good presentation. And if anyone else is ever interested in doing a presentation like that to the commission, please let me know, because I'd be happy to work with you on it. I think that, you know, we hear a lot in the meetings from different state agencies, but we don't always hear from the industry experts. So I would love to, you know, work with anyone who's interested in presenting on their perspective in making this transition. And the only other thing I wanted to mention was that we need everyone to participate in our guidelines development workshops, because there's a lot of policy decisions that get made in those workshops that impact the funding for those programs. And there's a lot of new priorities that we're looking at this in this next cycle. So we'll be doing a kickoff in August of those workshops. And if you could send a staff or something to participate, just to keep your organizations in the loop, I think that would be really great. And that's it.
Thank you, Hannah. We'll make sure that folks are aware of the workshops and when those are happening.
Thank you.
All right, next we will go to Avital Barnea from CalSTA. Avital, are you with us?
I'm here. Can you guys hear me and see me?
Yep, we can see you.
Okay, great. Hi, everybody. A few updates from CalSTA. Hopefully all of you have heard of our Climate Action Plan for Transportation Infrastructure, or CAPTI, as we're calling it for short. Just as a quick reminder to everybody, this is a holistic framework that is in response to Governor Newsom's 2 executive orders on climate change, Executive Order N1919 that came out in 2019, and Executive Order N7920 that came out in 2020. And those executive orders acknowledge that transportation is the largest contributor to statewide greenhouse gas emissions and directs us at CalSTA to leverage the more than $5 billion that we have in state transportation funding annually to mitigate the impacts of climate change and advance health and social equity goals. So the CAPTI document is the response to those executive orders, and per Executive Order N7920, it is due to the governor and the legislature by July 15th. So that's just a little bit more than a week from today. We've been working on this for about a year and a half, at this point. We had several opportunities for public comment, and we are just finalizing the document at this time, and we'll have that released by the July 15th deadline. I'll just give a little preview of the two main freight strategies that are included in the document, and these are really similar to the ones that were included in the draft that hopefully all of you saw. And those two freight-related provisions, the first one is mainstreaming zero-emission vehicle infrastructure within the Trade Corridor Enhancement Program, or TSEP. So that's one of the strategies we're recommending in the CAPTI document to help mitigate the impacts of climate change. And the CAPTI directs the CTC to update the TSEP guidelines to prioritize projects that reduce emissions by creating or improving zero-emission vehicle charging or fueling infrastructure. And in addition, the TSEP guidelines may include consideration of impacts to disadvantaged, low-income, and communities of color. The other main freight provision in the CAPTI is incorporating zero-emission freight infrastructure needs into the California Freight Mobility Plan. And the CAPTI directs Caltrans to work with this group, with the CFAC, to encourage and help accelerate the widespread transition to zero-emission technologies and infrastructure, in part through including these types of projects in the CFMP project list. Furthermore, the CFMP project list will prioritize projects that reduce impacts on environmental justice communities. So that's a little bit of what you'll see in the CAPTI, specifically regarding freight. We received about 800 comments to the document and have worked to address all of those. Right now, you can go to our website and see all of the public comment letters that we received and what folks asked us to change or strengthen in the plan. And we also uploaded documents showing how we plan to do that. And then, like I said, you'll see the final version itself likely next week before the July 15th deadline. Okay, next update is the budget. So on May 14th, Governor Newsom released the California Comeback Plan, which is a $100 billion economic recovery package, which is the largest in the state's history. And that was included as part of the fiscal year 21-22 revised budget proposal. The California Comeback Plan is a comprehensive plan to help lead the state to economic recovery following the pandemic and to help tackle our most persistent challenges, which include aging infrastructure, climate change, wildfires, homelessness and housing affordability, disparities in education, and then relief for those hardest hit by COVID-19. Within the California Comeback Plan, there is over $11 billion of state investment in the transportation system. And probably most relevant to this group are proposals for $500 million to support critical safety improvements, including grade separations and grade crossings, $3.2 billion to invest in zero-emission vehicles and infrastructure, including trucks, rail equipment, and charging infrastructure, which would be a great corollary to the CAPTI document that I just mentioned. In addition, the California Comeback Plan proposes $900 million for a cleaner and more resilient 22nd century electric grid to help support all of that zero-emission future that we will see here in the state. And then there's also $250 million to address revenue impacts on seaports to help drive economic activity, goods movement, and regional employment. So normally the budget is in place by June 15th, but that hasn't happened this year. The budget process has been especially drawn out. And on June 28th, the legislature approved what they're calling Budget Bill Junior, which partially addresses the governor's budget and the California Comeback Plan. And it moves the legislature and the governor closer to a final deal, but we don't have an official deal yet. So there's been nothing official coming out of the governor's office. I definitely want to let you know what the governor's office has proposed in the California Comeback Plan and where we are in that process. Those were the main updates. Just a heads up on 2 additional things. I want to let everyone know that CALSTA was invited to participate in a California Inland Port Executive Advisory Group, which is being led by the Fresno Council of Governments and the 7 other San Joaquin Valley COGs, as well as the ports of LA and Long Beach. We participated in the initial meeting of that group, which was held in late May, and we're looking forward to staying engaged with the group. For everyone's information, the California Inland Port Project would develop a 425-mile-long multimodal logistics spine to connect the San Pedro Bay seaports to key markets in Northern California via the San Joaquin Valley. And then the last quick update I'll give is just a heads up for tomorrow. You will hear from a panel including my colleague Giles Giovinazzi from CALSTA, Hannah Walter, who you just heard from CTC, and Frank Ramirez from the Governor's Office of Business and Economic Development, who will be talking about port congestion and the impacts of what we've been seeing going on in the supply chain, especially over the past year and a half or so. This is something we've been monitoring really closely at CALSTA. There's a lot of attention. We've seen attention at the federal level, as well as the local levels and regional levels. And so just wanted to let everyone know there will be more information to come on that tomorrow during the panel. So that's what I have. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Avital. Any questions for Avital? And actually, I should have asked any questions for Hannah as well. Not looking at the chat, but are there any questions in the chat, Allison?
Not right now.
All right. Well, let's turn it over to our last update, which is from Marlon Flournoy in Division of Transportation Planning. Take it away, Marlon.
Great, thank you. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay, great. All right, wanted to provide a couple of updates. Get my screen worked out here. All right, so first update is the Division of Transportation Planning, and along with the districts, we're working on 3 applications for the US DOT Rebuilding America Infrastructure with Sustainability and Equity. So this is the RAISE program. And so Caltrans, we're going to be submitting 3 programs. One is the Sonoma Marin Area Rail Transit, the Smart Windsor Extension Project. So this is in our District 4 area. We're also working on a Caltrans Community Reconnection Plan and Pilot Project. And so really what this is looking at is communities that have been scarred by highway improvements, that have basically cut through communities. And so we're going to be, standing up a statewide program as part of the proposal to, find innovative solutions to, basically repair some of those harms, that have been put on those communities. We're also going to be looking at some pilot locations, and so we're really excited about that submittal. And then there's also the Cabrillo Boulevard bicycle, pedestrian, and rail improvements. So this is in District 5. This is part of the Santa Barbara 101 corridor improvements. So really excited about those, and we're going to be submitting those applications to USDOT this week. So excited about those projects. Also, we recently announced our planning grant fund. So we announced about $34 million from the Sustainable Transportation Planning Grant Awards. And so, while the program looks at a variety of different studies, including active transportation, innovative planning, we are really excited that about $2 million has been awarded towards studying critical freight corridors across the state. And and basically all the way from Shasta to San Diego. So I'm really excited about those. And if you want a complete list, those are posted on our website. We'll be more than happy to share that link after my update. Also, we're working with the Federal Highway Administration on the mid-performance period report, which requires Caltrans to describe how we'll meet our truck travel time reliability targets. So we're currently investigating target bottlenecks in the state and documenting infrastructure projects, transportation demand management actions, and other strategies that will relieve these bottlenecks and help meet the state's time travel reliability targets. So we're going to be sending that over to FHWA next week. Also, and this is my last update, or actually I have 2 more updates. So the Division of Transportation Planning, working with the districts and various partners, received a grant award for the INFRA program. So that's the Infrastructure for Rebuilding America grant. And so California, happy to report that we received 3 awards. One of those awards includes a bottleneck relief project in one of our state's most impacted freight corridors. And so the Los Angeles County Metropolitan Transportation Authority will be awarded $30 million in grant funding to construct improvements aimed at improving traffic flow in the confluence area. This is about 1.3 miles between State Route 57 and State Route 60 freeways in Los Angeles County. So that's a really big success there. And we also have been working with our districts on providing funding through our state planning and research program. And so we provided about $350,000 and to our District 11 office to fund a sustainable freight action plan for San Diego and Imperial counties. We're also funding another $1 million for on-call contract for freight planning technical services to help support our statewide freight program with the districts. So excited about that. And then the last update, Jeannie had mentioned this earlier, but we put out a call for innovative concepts. And so we're really excited about that. One of the things that we really want to try to start moving towards is really looking for some of the real innovative projects. You know, as there are lots of discussions happening in Washington on potential federal funding, you know, associated with the Biden administration's American Jobs Plan. We want to make sure that we're positioning ourselves in the state to be able to, you know, compete for those dollars. You know, a lot of the projects that we've, you know, typically have funded over the past several years, you know, have been, you know, fairly straightforward in terms of, you know, you're dealing with like congestion, you add a lane, you know, you want to provide, you know, traffic operational improvements. We you know, have ramp metering and those sorts of things. And so basically what we're looking for is really sort of the innovative types of solutions, you know, that are in alignment with our goals and guiding principles and some of the planning documents, such as the California Transportation Plan 2050. Avital already touched on the California Action Plan for Transportation Infrastructure. So we really want to make sure that we're getting some of that out-of-box thinking, you know, because a lot of the projects that we have in our pipeline, you know, have a lot of merit, but we want to make sure that, you know, when we compete for these funds, you know, we're separating ourselves, you know, from some of the other projects that might be moving forward. So having said that, the concepts don't have to be fully baked, as Jeannie referenced. You know, we're really just looking for, you know, some ideas, and we've, you know, created some different categories to help us organize some of the concepts. So some of them, are related to system management, process improvement, new technology, mode shift, and also quality of life. And so we just want to make sure that that we're getting all of your guys' ideas. And so the deadline for submitting the concepts is July the 15th. So it's not too late to get your concepts in. I think so far we've gotten 4 submittals, and we've gotten a lot of interest from a variety of different stakeholders. So we're expecting to get many more in the next week or so. But we'll be more than happy to provide a link to where you can submit your comments, and it's a really easy form to fill out. So definitely encourage you guys to submit your innovative ideas, especially in the freight space, because this is an area where we really want to emphasize some of the innovation to be able to really address some of the challenges that we have in the freight sector. That will conclude my comments.
Thank you, Marlon. I'm seeing a question in the chat. Allison, maybe you can read the questions for us.
I don't know if I'm having a technical difficulty, but I don't see any questions.
I see it in the Q&A panel. It looks like someone asked, Marlon, can you please post the link that you referenced? I think that's regarding the call for innovative concepts. Maybe we can send that out also in a follow-up email. And I see Michael Kano also asked a question about the infra announcements. Maybe that was before you described the grants, Marlon. But if
I
we
can
need
send out a
more
couple of links, Jeannie.
Okay.
So I'll send out
Great.
the link for the planning grants, the infra announcement, and then also the link for the innovative concepts.
Great. Okay, excellent. Thank you, Marlon. Are there any other questions for Marlon or for any of our other partner panelists before we wrap up? We can end, if not, we can end a few minutes early. All right, seeing none, thank you all for participating this morning. Just a reminder, we will reconvene for the second half of the meeting tomorrow afternoon. So see you all again at 3 p.m. tomorrow, and thank you for participating this morning. Have a good rest of your day.